Hey everyone, Joseph Shapiro here. Happy to be here with Sarah and our friend Jenna. I'm going to look forward to talking about Oregon service centers today and a lot of other related topics on which Jenna is an expert. Really appreciate Jenna being here, and please, as always, share your comments and ask questions live if you're watching this live, and feel free to reach out to Jenna and Sarah and I during and after. And Sarah, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, totally. So, Jenna, super excited to be able to speak with you. I'll do a little bit of an intro and then we'll sort of open it up. So, Jenna holds a master's degree in professional counseling from Central Michigan University and has over 20 years of experience helping clients navigate and address anxiety, depression, substance dependence, and post-traumatic stress. Jenna's particular specialty is working with clients with borderline personality disorder diagnoses, which I'm super excited to also be able to get into here. And she regularly attends conferences, giving keynotes on the intersection of psychedelics and BPD. In her personal life, Jenna is a wife, a mother of 3 boys, and a nature lover, and is often found camping on the weekends each Oregon summer. So I am really excited to hear, first and foremost, what drove you into the area of therapy? And then beyond that, what guided you rather, because we're usually guided to psychedelics, what guided you to the medicine?
Well, a friend brought me medicine on my birthday when I was 17. And that is actually what guided me to counseling. I was going to be a veterinarian and I ate some mushrooms on my 17th birthday and everything turned purple and I felt the most love I've ever experienced towards myself and thought, wow, this is something that everyone should experience. And the following days, I started really thinking, 17 as a senior, I started thinking about college, and I was going into, I was in my senior year. So I was picking colleges and trying to decide what my degree would be in. And so I moved from veterinary to counseling pretty much just a few days after that experience. So that's how I got into counseling. And then I've been a psychonaut ever since. I've the medicine in a variety of healing ways for myself. As far as using it professionally, the medicine guided people to me. I just had clients coming in saying, hey, I ate mushrooms this weekend and I really need to talk about it. I'm like, yes, you do. Let's talk about it. So I started doing really informal integration work probably about 15 years ago now, helping people kind of work through those messages that they got from the medicine. And it's really just strange how it just kept coming to me. And that started in Michigan in my practice there. And then I moved out here to Portland, Oregon in 2017 and started a private practice here. And it was almost immediate. I started getting clients that were like, hey, can we talk about this? So I kind of continued. And at the same time, Measure 109, which is the measure that we passed here in 2020 to legalize psilocybin use, adult use of psilocybin, that was starting in 2017. And I think it was the first month I even was here. My husband and I went to a talk, a kind of a mini conference on what they were trying to do with that measure. Tom and Sheree Eckert had put on an evening to talk about what they were trying to do with this measure. And I'm like, no way, this is actually going to happen. This is amazing. And then it did. So as that started to progress, I started moving more and more away from professional counseling. I really just started to feel that it was actually unethical for me to not bring up this medicine. And it was against my licensure to say that this could be a helpful thing for my clients. So I really started to feel like it was not within my moral ethics anymore to not say anything. So I ended up dropping my license and moving into psychedelic integration coaching completely. Yeah.
Wow. That's really wild. Sounds like a wild and beautiful experience for a 17-year-old.
It was.
It sounds like it was perfectly guided into your life. I know you went on eventually to open the Journey, which was a service center in Oregon. What led you to that?
I was at a conference, PsyCon here in Portland, and I had a booth and I was speaking on borderline personality disorder and psychedelics. And I was approached by my partner with the journey there. He was there from Utah, and Oregon law is that people from out of state aren't allowed to open a service center, have a lab, have a grow operation, or be a facilitator until 2025. So he wanted to get in on it earlier and couldn't because he's a Utah resident. So the rules required someone that had been a resident of Oregon for at least 2 years to be a 51% owner. So he had a booth there, hiring facilitators, but his main goal was to find a partner. So he approached me and several other people in partnering with that. And that was not something I had on my radar ever to do. I'd worked more in the underground space and kind of function there as a harm reduction person. And I still have a lot of issues with the legal system here and how it's rolling out and how it was originally planned to roll out. One of the things being that integration is a very small piece of it. It isn't really talked about much. It's a required check-in for our facilitators, but they don't have to provide integration. And for me, that's how I started this, was integrating the experience. And as far as I'm concerned, the medicine is a tool to show us things, and then we need to take those things and put it into our life, and that's where the real change takes place. So I kind of go by that motto of, if you're not integrating, you're just doing drugs, which is also fine if you want. But if you're really looking to change something with this, you can't expect to just go have a sitting with a psychedelic and then magically everything's different. Like, there's work to be done afterwards. So I started talking about that. And one of the people that Clint had with him, helping him find folks, was another integration and underground person who was like, yes, that's really important too. So we talked about how we would be implementing integration as part of our model for having a service center and offering integration services as well. And so that really piqued my interest. And then the other part of it that turned me towards, maybe this is something I want to help and do, was his initial talk about being low income, trying to provide the service as cheaply as possible. And I don't want to get into a whole bunch of talking about him, but that was not his focus. His focus was to make money. I see that now. And I thought it was exactly the opposite. He specifically said, money is no issue, and we're going to do this, whatever it takes. And, after 5 months of being open with no profit, he was done doing it. So that was really disappointing, but that was really what I was in it for. So, and then moving past the journey, we closed in March. And when we closed, another service center owner, Kat, who owns Fractal Soul, she and I have worked closely since the get-go. She was actually one of my facilitators on board before she opened her service center. And we had multiple discussions about helping, what she needed to do for her service center. We all started talking about building community as opposed to competition in this industry, and her and I conversation. So when the word got out that the journey was closing, she got a hold of me and was like, hey, I could really use some help. So if any way that you could help me at Fractal Soul, I would love to have you. So it's been really great. She gave me this opportunity to start the equity program at Fractal, because again, that's really where my heart is to help people who can't afford this, because it is really expensive. That's probably one of the bigger downfalls of our program out here in Oregon, is how expensive it is and inaccessible it is for folks who really, really need it. So we started talking about that, and I came up with this plan of getting a ton of providers available, so that it would be, I don't want to burn out them either, right? There's a lot of parts to this that the cost is almost unavoidable for a lot. Like, people trying to make a living in this, you can't charge $20 an hour or something when you only can see one person a day, when you can only see maybe 2-3 people a week, because it really is a lot of work to sit with someone. It's a lot that they're doing there. So anyway, my plan was to get as many facilitators on board so that we could not cause burnout amongst our facilitators, but also provide a cheap, affordable service that is not any different. There's other places doing like groups at very reasonable amounts, but I actually specifically heard from someone that was very low income that was very upset about that. And they're like, that's exactly right. Like, why should you have to do it in a group when other people who can afford it get to do it by themselves? You should get the exact same treatment. So that's what we're doing at Fractal. And I'm super excited to have transitioned to that and to continue what my journey with my dream with the journey really was. That's what he sold me on, was we're going to do this cheaper than anyone else. We're going to be able to make this accessible. And I was all for it. So I'm happy to be doing that at Fractal.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about like that model that you tried to make work at Journey that did to make it accessible. What were some of the tools that you sort of pulled in to help to I guess a better question would be, what drives the cost in these service centers? Like, what are the big expenses that you encountered?
Well, our license, first of all, is $10,000 a year. So that's $800 a month that you have to budget for. That's a huge bill. Every single service that comes with this is an expense beyond what is the norm. The lawyers are charging a lot for this. The accountant, having an accountant, if you want to have an accountant that's really well versed in the 280E tax codes, they're really expensive. The property for the Journey, specifically, the location of the building was in a not so good neighborhood. That was another part of constantly replacing cameras, for example, that the homeless folks would take off the building. And honestly, it was still doable if I would have been aware of the budget. So some of that stuff, Clint was in charge of the budget part because he was the money guy. Like, that's basically what he did, was the money part of it. And I did all the rest. So I don't know exactly what all of his numbers were. I know he bought the building, and this is why it's kind of Journey specific. This whole situation is because he bought the building outright, and then I don't know why, just kept saying, I really need to sell that building. So I don't know what that was about. I didn't ask. But for other folks, it is that licensure. It's the having to, if there's any kind of thing that they have to follow up with a lawyer on, that's like I do know that one of the emails from a lawyer was $1,200 for an email response. Like, it's a lot. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you find, was it that the regulations were just really difficult to like navigate and understand? So you needed somebody to sort of filter through that for you?
Yeah, the regulations are pretty gray. There's 125 pages of rules. So there's a lot of them, but all of them are based on Oregon Health Authority's interpretation. So making sure that you are interpreting it the same way. The lawyers kind of look at it of like, well, they can interpret it this way, but actual law says this. So having some advice around that and being able to have some standing with the OHA saying, well, no, this is what the actual law says. This is what the lawyers say the law says. And being able to have that conversation, it's by itself expensive. And yeah, the regulations, there's a lot of them. And I appreciate that. Like, I want this to be safe. That would be the last thing I want for any of this, is for something tragic to happen in Oregon and shut the whole thing down for the whole country. That's been something that I was a stickler about. Like, I was very well known that I was a rule follower, even though I'm very much not most of the time. But for this, we are not going to mess this up. We're going to follow every single rule, and we will question it and talk to lawyers and see what we can do about it. But what they say is what they say right now, and we need to follow the rules because we want to keep this program going. So, but yeah, there's a lot of rules and a lot of oversight and a lot of just little nitpicky things that are expensive. So to have one of the things I know we're looking at for rule changes is use of service center space outside of operating hours for psilocybin use. We're not allowed to use it at all without a licensed service center representative there on staff at all times. So that means that if I wanted to rent the space to a yoga instructor, for example, just to make some extra income, I have to pay one of my staff to be there to just sit there to make sure. I don't know why, because the whole place has cameras in it. Like that's also part of the rules is there's cameras. So that's one that we're hoping will change, is that we can utilize the space without having to have a service center representative there paid to be able to get some extra income, because it's impossible. You don't get to make anything when you're paying for someone to staff the place to be used. So it's that kind of stuff. There's not a lot of leeway to make income with.
Yeah. Can imagine too. I mean, especially like since you're not able to do night ceremony, center activity, having a yoga class in the evening at least, and making it something that also creates community around your center, which helps your center to be more well known within the community. And also, as you mentioned, integration, a great way to sort of bring sort of people into community and even movement as integration.
Yes. Yeah, I had planned on some of that. My original thoughts around microdosing was going to be like workshops and stuff to do with folks, but that's not allowed either, because that's considered directive. So we're not allowed to have any kind of psilocybin use that has any kind of directive activity around it. So that's another issue.
If you could wave a magic wand and start fresh, just build your own. Let's say you were tasked with building like overarching structure for the regulations for, I don't know, Texas, just starting fresh. Like, how would you, what are the top 3 things you would do to make sure that the business could meet all its goals, including being profitable? And I don't know if that means scaling. I don't know if that means what that means, but like, what would you think? What would you think you would propose?
As far as just having like rules around a service center to make that business
so you start with a blank slate. It's like whatever you decide will happen, short of legalizing all psychedelics and just everybody can grow them at home and for free. If you had a structure that was still a service center structure effectively, but you could change all the rules around it, including using it on off hours for other things. And what are some of the top things that come to mind that you would suggest in that model, in your proposal?
Not having a license fee that's $10,000, like maybe a couple hundred, a reasonable amount. That would be number one. That is a really hard number up with every year. And having it be more service oriented. So for example, one of the other rules is that we're not allowed to make anything, even open a packet of tea for our clients, because that's considered food service. So we have to have our food license to have to prepare anything. So like when I wanted to make smoothies for folks and have all this like fresh fruit and have all that on hand, so people could pick what fruit they wanted and all this stuff and make it in the blender and go off. I wanted to make it more spa-like feeling, and we're not allowed to do that. We can't have unpackaged foods. So even like if I got a big bag of frozen blueberries, once it's opened, it's considered unpackaged and open, and we can't use it again after our first client. So having the ability to be more service oriented in a service center would be another thing that I would want. And then the other thing would be, and we already have, I am very thankful that they did lower the restrictions around the non-directive facilitation rule a little bit. They have changed it from just like no directive at all. It has to be completely non-directive all the time to, if a client asks for something that is within the facilitator's scope of practice, they can provide that to them. So if someone is trained in breath work and some sort of breath work, and the client says, hey, I want you to lead me in a breath work exercise, they can do that now. That wasn't the case at first. So that is a progress, but I would like it to be more like, yes, you can have karaoke and microdosing, and you can have, so that's the facilitator rules too would be something I would totally change so that we could make microdosing events be more feasible. So even with microdosing, the rule is that you can't have another person in the room with them other than the facilitator, unless there's these 4 reasons why. So an interpreter, if they need mobility issues, they need help getting to the bathroom, if they need help administering a medication, or if they have like a colostomy bag or some medical device that they need assistance with. Those are the reasons that they can have a support person in the room with them. And that is it. So doing things like having a yoga instructor who's not also a licensed facilitator come in and provide yoga during a microdosing class is not allowed unless I can find a facilitator who's also a yoga instructor. So those kind of things like really muddy up the services that we can provide that we know are helpful to folks using psychedelics. So those would be my big ones, is lowering that, making it more service friendly, and making the rules around providers. Because I also would like to see, for example, who knows them for years, to come and sit and witness what's happening. Not to interject in any way, but to just sit and be a witness to what they're doing, because that would be that's probably going to be their integration person afterwards. I would love to be able to have them come and witness what their client's experiencing so that they can help them better integrate that. So changing that support person, or who can be in the room, would be another big one for me.
That's really interesting about not being able to offer like nourishment afterwards. I mean, we know that, mushrooms are can be quite dehydrating, and to really sort of have like a smoothie or some fresh fruit, tea would be really, it's interesting that was limited.
We can have it, but it has to be, so the client can bring their own stuff, but it has to be packaged. It can't be homemade. And again, we can offer like packaged things. And honestly, there's some questions around the fruit thing, like if that was allowed to be brought in, like an apple, an orange, like if we don't unpeel the orange, then it's packaged. There's still that's some of the gray area of what we can offer, but we definitely can't make anything for them, or it's something simple like a smoothie, or even opening the tea. They're supposed to open their own tea bag when they pour their tea.
Are there any, one of the focuses of Psychedelic League is how municipalities can potentially help make the experience better for the operators and for people who are going to service centers. So what municipal restrictions do you think have been impactful, or what would you change, if anything, about what you've seen the township or ordinances do?
I don't know. Well, I'm very fortunate to be in Portland, where we are more open to doing things. I know that some other counties have been really, really restrictive on what they want to allow. But I guess one of the bigger ones that's hard for a service center to open here is the rule of land use. We have to be a certain distance from a school, any kind of school, or a place like preschool, anything like that. And I got to say, there are so many schools in Portland. I had no idea. But it really, really limits. So that was part of the issue. The journey was its location. Not being able to have a more safe location was a detriment to our business. I know that multiple facilitators didn't like going there because there was often a homeless individual on the front steps when we got there. And there was often a mess to be cleaned up in the parking lot, and just the area in general. We tried really hard to make sure we got there first and stuff, but there was one incident where a client arrived before anyone else and saw the homeless individual on the front steps, and that was a really difficult journey for them. They multiple times kind of came to and was like, I don't know if I'm safe. Where is he? Is he still out there? So having the ability to have centers in different neighborhoods that, having the by school thing reduced, because it's really quite ridiculous. No one can come in the front door without getting their ID checked. So having it even right next to a school isn't really going to be much of a thing. We haven't had that. We have had some reports of people leaving, but not in a violent way. They just wanted to go home. So it seems a little ridiculous that we are so restricted in the location of where we can operate.
Right. Do you remember what was the distance you had to be from a school?
I believe it was 1,000 feet.
That's actually what Joe and I see in the current bill for New Jersey as well.
Is it?
Yeah, it's not really sure. I don't know what the, objectively, I guess it's just being overly cautious. You want to keep anything that seems drug related away from a school, but that's kind of a big brush you're using, and it's not really considering the context. Well, I mean, to your earlier point about location, obviously, like a location that you just described is not conducive to like a relaxing, or therapeutic or whatever adjective you want to use it experience. But on the flip side, what do you think, if you could imagine like the most conducive location, what would you imagine? If you can again use like wave a magic wand and say, here's where my ideal place would be to have a service center operate.
If it was in a city location, for me, it would be a more nature-based place, not for during the journey. I know that a lot of people really like, myself included, to be out in nature when they're experiencing these medicines. And I've also decided, I don't know if there's any kind of research behind any of this, but nature is just as distracting as putting some fun show on TV and laughing at it while you're tripping, right? Nature is a distraction, just like anything else. This type of work that we're looking at is the eye shades go inward, and it's not as easy to go inward when there's so much beauty around you that you want to be immersive in and participate in when you're, in it. So my ideal would be, again, if I'm in a city type location, would be a big house with lots of big rooms. It's about to have some room to both lay down and get down on the ground and move around on the ground if you need to. And then to have an outside, like a pretty decent sized yard, to have the afterward to kind of go and settle down in nature afterwards, after the peak part of it. That would be my ideal setup. Mm-hmm.
It's super insightful. No, it's insightful because it's important that as these laws are discussed and preferences are kind of shared, even just like anecdotes, like it's super important for us to hear what you, as an experienced, as someone who has more experience than like 99.9% of people in the United States, thinks would be ideal. And what you've described is probably off limits under New Jersey's legislation because, certainly under Oregon's legislation, right? Residential areas, there's a buffer zone, and in New Jersey, there's a buffer zone. You can't anywhere that's purely residential is off limits, and that is where most houses, I'm sure, are. So short of like building a house anew in an industrial zone, who knows? The laws as they're written kind of don't take into consideration like actual experience. So sharing this experience is helpful. And hopefully will influence zoning. Really, zoning is huge. That's what we're fixated on.
Yeah, we do have mixed use commercial residential here. You can't have a residence in. I take that back. I think there's actually one place that does have an apartment upstairs, but it has a separate entrance and all of that. So as long as it's locked out. There are a few places that are houses, because Portland has a lot of mixed use commercial areas where there's houses that are businesses. So there is that capability here. Fractal Soul is office building, but it's up on the 3rd floor, and there's some definite perks around that. Is that there's multiple offices. We don't advertise where we are within that office, so it's not like you could find it right away. So like safety and security type reasons around having a Schedule I substance locked up in your building, not having that level of security is nice too. They have to go through multiple things to even figure out where the service center is in that building. So that's nice.
I'll flash this Fractal Soul. Sorry, it's on Sarah. Luckily it's not right on your face, but it's next to Sarah up there. I don't know how to move it otherwise. That's just where it lives right now. But if people want to go and
I can Vanna White this.
It's actually perfect. That's great. Yeah. Oh, I was going to move on to inner dimensions, and I'll flash that QR code next. But Sarah, did you have a follow up about Fractal?
I do. Regarding the $10,000 annual licensing fee, I know in New Jersey the bill says that it cannot exceed the costs that is incurred by the state. Did you guys have similar language in yours, and the 10,000 happens to be what the state decided that the cost incurred?
So our law is going to be, it was not supposed to be taxpayer funded. It's supposed to be self-sustained program. So that's where they got their number, was that they kind of did an estimate of like how much the program would cost, how many people would be coming into it, and this is what it's going to cost to renew. So labs, manufacturers, and service centers have a $10,000 license renewal. The facilitators have $2,000 license renewal. One I kind of have a beef about, because this is where the big money is coming in and they don't have to renew and they don't have to follow a lot of these rules, are the schools. There's a lot of schools popping up that I don't know how well they're training their facilitators, but they're making a lot of money and they have a one-time fee and that's it. So that's a little bit frustrating as a business owner. Seeing the differentials there is a little frustrating.
That's so interesting, because a lot of these courses are in the thousands of dollars, and then facilitators also have $2,000 a year annual fee.
Yeah.
I am totally understanding why it is so expensive out there.
Yeah.
These like regulatory fees are really pricey.
They are. Yeah.
I mean, that's actually way more than my nurse. That's way more than a nursing license.
Yeah, it's way more than a counseling license. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. That's interesting, because then you're of course trying to make it equitable. Like that just becomes, and for somebody to even just be able to sustain themselves as a facilitator, versus having to have other jobs, careers, side hustles to just make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to that point, what are the economics? And you don't have to share about any specific center, but like what kind of revenue do you think they should expect to make? Because I think that makes a big, like let's say you are trying to open up in a state like New Jersey or somewhere else, you have substantial rent obligations if you're renting. I'm sure a lot of companies would rent instead of buying outright, unless they already have access to a building that they somehow own, which seems rare. I mean, substantial. You're talking thousands of dollars a month. Honestly, it makes the $800 a month licensing fee like nothing compared to rent, right, and insurance and everything else, which are thousands and thousands of dollars. You can just assume, and then you're probably doing some slight build out of the space, and you have a website, and you can't do advertising, but perhaps you have some other initiatives, and maybe you're all offering scholarships. So what's your sense of what kind of turnover or what kind of business needs to be run by a service center to make it self-sustainable, and have it go to the long haul,
Yeah, I think for the long haul vision, having more like coaching opportunities on site, and this is where it's that use of the building thing. If we can't book up our building with psilocybin macrodose journeys 7 days a week, it would be really great to have, maybe we do that for 4 days a week, and 3 days a week we open it up to all the facilitators to have one-on-one integration sessions with their clients or something, and have like a room rental thing where you're making some money on just renting a room to the facilitators to keep it busy. So at the journey, I only opened up 3 days a week because that's another thing is you don't want to you're trying to staff a place where you can't guarantee appointments happening every day, you know? So I started with just opening 3 days a week so that I could staff it and try to fill it that way and not have to call off people like, oh, we don't have a client today, don't come into work, kind of thing. So having the ability to use the space in multiple ways would really open up a lot of more business revenue. Like if I could do regular like yoga stuff, breathwork exercise, sound bath, like that kind of thing that also maybe even offered microdosing with it. That would be really great to be able to do. But groups are hard to fill too. So really trying to figure out ways to use the space other than just psilocybin use would be helpful too. I almost think of it as like a salon type thing where you rent a chair, right? Like if you want to be a facilitator, you could maybe rent the room these 2 days a week to see clients one-on-one, and then also see your client for their macro dose on these other 4 days that were open for psilocybin journeys. Because that's hard. You get one room that gets to get used one day, you know? So trying to like for me, when I was a counselor, it's $150 an hour. And I can see 8 people a day or so if I wanted to, you know? Whereas you're just looking at one room rental for one person. And again, that's like, well, it's so expensive, $500 for a room. Or it's like, yeah, but that's the day. And that's all we can make on that room for the day. So having more of an ability to use the space in different ways would be really helpful. I don't know if I answered that question. I feel like I got away from it a little bit.
That makes a lot of sense, because it doesn't seem like there's anything in a service center that would prevent it from being used for other things, other than the fact that there is psilocybin presumably stored on site. But I guess it could also, there's ways around that. I mean, there's ways to either secure it more on site or to have it not be on site during those other times.
Here, that's the thing too, is we're required to have at least a safe that's like I think 3,000 pound safe or something. I can't remember the exact specifications on that, or have a steel door that separates the room, you know, the door to the limited access area has to be like this big steel door that's like a bank door kind of thing. Plus there has to be cameras inside and outside of that room. So like it's really secure as is. So that's why it's kind of silly to have to pay someone to sit there and like make sure no one goes near that door, that they can't get in, and they'll be on camera if they do, you know? So yeah, that's already a requirement that is a really secure area. So
yeah, land use is so important. And I mean, it's the core of everything. It's the place where people, you have to have use of the land, and to assume that you can only use it for the one purpose is it kind of ties you up too much unnecessarily, especially where you know, there should be an understanding that this is like a holistic endeavor. It's not just but I guess I've been saying more and more, I think to some extent we've been shooting ourselves in the foot, people who are advocating, you know, people in groups who are advocating for psychedelics use, because there is a tendency to lean into the idea that there can be like a one and done thing, and it's so powerful. You can have one experience, and then that kind of exists in the zeitgeist, and I think some people lean into that, you know. And so then if you lean into that, then the idea is like, well, you don't need to use the space for anything but just administering this drug effectively. You know, I think that's where the paradigm is confused. You know, there's a confusion around the rhetoric around it. And so that's something we kind of keep coming back to, is like, how can we still enforce the fact that psilocybin and other psychedelics are very effective, but not get so like lean over the tips of our skis so much, or lean into it so much where you kind of pin yourself into a corner when somebody argues, well, why can't you just have then a box where somebody could go put in eye shades, take the drugs, and then leave? Yeah. You know? So yeah, I think it's that's just a wider, you know, comprehension issue to some extent too. you know, I would imagine Oregon wouldn't go. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying there's a huge lack in education and people's expectations about this work. It is very much like, oh, I'm going to go do this one time and that's all I need to do. And it's like, no, again, integration's key. There's a lot of things to do in the after that is helpful for people. So yeah, it would be really great to be able to use spaces for more than just the one thing. And it makes the image of like, no, this is all you have to do. And then it's going to be this magic fix for you. It's like, no, it's not. And that's a huge lack in our, I love it. I don't like crap all over the wonderful things that are happening for the times that people are doing it, like over and over and over again. I've had the privilege to be able to see people walk out of their rooms like, oh, let me tell you what just happened. And like, you know, I was carrying my mom's pain and now I'm not. Like people literally standing up straight, like physically different after their session. That does that. I don't have any anxiety anymore. It was like this flip switched off, or I don't have any OCD symptoms at all, who were with their OCD have any symptoms return afterwards. That's awesome, but there's some upkeep to that. And for those folks, they're like, oh, well, maybe my OCD stuff is gone, but now I'm noticing this little bit of anxiety that was underlying that, right? So it is an ongoing, it's a tool. It's a tool that is a really, really effective tool, but it is a tool to get you to another place that you have to continue working on things. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for that. And I think I'll change the QR code now to Interdimensions, and the full name is Interdimensions Integration LLC, right? And this is your company?
Yeah, this one's my integration business. Yep.
Yeah, would you mind telling us about it?
Yeah, this is the one that I started when I, again, dropped my counseling license and moved right into integrating psychedelic experiences for folks. My primary focus is on borderline personality disorder. And that was something I luckily fell into at the beginning of my career at a community mental health place. I got the honor to get trained by Marshall Linehan's company in dialectical behavior therapy. And then I took off with that from there. I was the jail counselor, so I was the only mental health person in the jail, and I kind of got to do what I wanted. So I started noticing some of the differences between, and these two diagnoses are in the same cluster of diagnoses. So there's cluster B of personality disorders that include antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. So I was treating antisocial the assumption because they were in jail. In jail actually started to look more like borderline personality disorders to me. They had way more of those symptoms. It was those risky behaviors that are typical in this diagnosis. And for men, that tended to be illegal behaviors. So they were arrested and in jail with borderline personality disorder. So I started a men's group and really fell in love with that work and helping folks with that diagnosis. And then I moved into specializing in that in my private practice when I left that job. And that was when my first person came to me like, I ate mushrooms this weekend, I need to talk. And that was someone with BPD. And so fast forward to when I went to my psychedelic integration coaching training. That was a year-long training I took. On like class 2 or 3, we talked about contraindications for psychedelic use. And so mental health diagnoses came up, and it was schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been doing this for like 8 years, I think at the time. Not on purpose, but pretty successfully. What do you mean that these folks shouldn't be using this medicine? And as you know, my teacher went over some of that. It makes perfect sense. Like there's a level of stability that folks need to be at, but I think that that's true for any diagnosis across the board. That I don't think that we screen that out now in Oregon. That's one of the things that we screen out is, are you actively suicidal right now? And I know that this work has been shown to help reduce suicidality in folks, but we don't serve it to them when they're actively suicidal. And that's kind of the same criteria that I would say is important to look at with borderline personality disorder. There needs to be a level of stability with their diagnosis before they enter into this work. But it doesn't mean to me that they should be excluded from this work. So I kind of dove into like, what do you mean? I've never heard of this before. I've been doing this. So when I started looking at stuff, I'm like, oh, yeah, Every's John Hopkins study was leaving out all folks with BPD. That's one of their screen outs, and that's where my teacher had gotten this information from. Was you don't allow those people into the study. So that's where I went off and started speaking. I am not much of a public speaker, but it honestly kind of pissed me off. I'm like, that's so awful. The folks with this diagnosis already carry such a huge stigma with them. Amongst the therapy community, I can't tell you how often as a therapist, I would say, yeah, I specialize in helping folks with borderline personality disorder. And they're like, good for you, but ugh. So I got that same kind of response in the psychedelic community. I'm like, what the hell? This is awful. So it gave me the enough to get me to talk about it in public. And to let go of my and get up in front of people. So that again is how I met my partner and with the journey and got into all that stuff too. So, but for interdimensions, that is the population I work with mostly. I work with anybody who wants to work with me, really, but that is the population that I mostly have.
I'd love to learn. Sorry. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your work with that population. You brought up something on our first call where you talked about like what was necessary for, I think you called it the 5 S's that were necessary for somebody who has this diagnosis. And I mean, I think in some way that might be necessary for even somebody with, severe depression or PTSD. But I'd love to kind of, if you don't mind sharing those again, because I thought that was really, really profound.
Yeah, so I want to give credit to my teacher, Cherie Goddessy, who started with the 4 S's. Everyone's very aware of the set and setting S's. That's 2 of them. You have set and setting. Cherie in psychedelic school taught me about skills, making sure that the client has some adequate, at least, navigation skills to navigate the journey itself. And then integration skills for afterwards. And then support is the 4th S that Cherie had. And that is, before and after support, like what kind of support do they have in their life? If they have an integration coach, that's awesome. And if they have a therapist, awesome. But do they have someone they can call at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're just had a nightmare? And it's like, this thing came up that was in my journey and I don't know, like, do they have someone they can call? What really assessing for supports. And folks with BPD, that is one of the diagnostic criteria is these chaotic relationships. So making sure that they have some stability within relationship to be able to have that kind of community with them is really one of the things that you really need to look at. And then my husband and I, when we were talking through all this stuff one day, and I was doing a prep workshop thing. I'm like, no one talks about safety. And he was like, that's your 5th S. I'm like, you're right. I mean, we talk about safety, but not in the same way that we talk about set and setting. And so safety for me is not only testing like safety of the substance itself. Like, do you know where you got your medicine from? Unfortunately, I've heard awful stories now of both cannabis and psilocybin mushrooms having fentanyl dust on them. I don't know why or who wants to do this, but it's happened. So there's things like that out there. So just making sure you know your source and making sure that your medicine itself is safe is something that doesn't get talked about enough. And then just where the person set is part of that assessment, right? Like with that, but also just safety in general. Do they have safe living environment? Are they in any kind of like relationship or housing or career crisis right now? Like that impedes on their safety. Psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. If there's something that's in crisis for these folks, that could get amplified and not in a good way. So making sure that they have safety, a good safety net around them in that kind of way as well is really important.
So sorry, just to clarify, so in Oregon, borderline personality disorder would preclude you from accessing psilocybin services?
Not necessarily. That was the school I went to that said that, and as I looked into it, that is kind of a thing that people have come to believe. So I know that there's multiple schools here too, facilitator trainings that are also echoing that sentiment. I know there's a few service centers that outright ask that in their initial screening form online and just boot you immediately. That's not something that is in the requirements by law, but I know that people are getting taught that and are choosing to not help those folks.
Are there any diagnoses in Oregon that are an absolute no from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, anything with psychosis. Yeah, if there's been any history of psychosis, that's a no. Also, I don't think that bipolar is a hard no, but if you have been on lithium for the last 30 days, it's a no. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, Sarah.
I was just saying, I imagine one of the big pieces is going to be drug interactions. Medication interactions is going to be a big roadblock for certain people with certain diagnoses.
Mm-hmm. We have been finding that people with SSRIs are having successful journeys. We have to give them more of the medicine, though. I'm not supposed to be calling it medicine, the mushrooms. It's not medicine. So there's those folks who are on who have high blood pressure. That's a contraindication too medically. Mushrooms can increase blood pressure, as any psychedelics can. They're vasoconstrictors. They can increase the blood pressure. So if someone has really high blood pressure, that's probably not a good idea for them to do this, at least not at a high dose, maybe trying a microdose first to see how they tolerate it, kind of thing. We've learned some things. We've learned Ozempic is something that we need to be screening for. We've had, not at Fractal and not at the Journey, this happened, but I know someone was on Ozempic and didn't launch while they were at the service center, and launched either that night or the next day, because that's how long their body took to process it. And so they were not in the service center when they started experiencing the effects. I don't think it was something that, it wasn't, they were followed up with their facilitator and taken care of, and everything was fine. But it is something that we have learned now to screen for and to tell people not to take their Ozempic for a while before they have the mushrooms. Liver function is another thing that we're learning about more and more. And people's age, like you can have really good liver functions tests, but the age of your liver is still slowed down. So the processing is really slow. So we have had some times where folks didn't launch at the usual window. And so we gave more thinking that they needed a boost, and they didn't need a boost. They just launched like 3 hours later and launched a lot.
Wow, 3 hours later.
That's really interesting. Do you think that that's liver function, or do you think there may be some play with, because with age comes like decreasing stomach acidity and maybe change in how well or how quickly they're starting to break it down?
Yeah, that could be part of it too. All of that. There's some more of those medical things that are very, individual that we are starting to learn.
Jenna, do you have any thoughts about the rest of like the ecosystem, about cultivation, or I don't think there's quite manufacturing. I could be wrong in Oregon. Really, it's testing. Can you give us like your overall, just general thoughts about the rest of the? Yeah.
I think that it's been interesting to watch the cultivators and the manufacturers. I don't think there's like some competition out there, but it seems to be that they're trying to make more and more potent strains, which in some ways are good, but other ways it's like, maybe we should just get used to what we've got to see how this goes. Because with the lab testing included, it's been a thing that I've nerded out on for sure, is this dosing thing. The dosing thing was a huge kind of upset for everyone. Not upset in a way of like mad or anything, but like, oh no, what do we do? No one had dosed in terms of milligrams of psilocybin with the natural mushroom. So like the John Hopkins studies and stuff are done with synthetic psilocybin, 25 milligrams. That doesn't include all the other tryptamines that are in the actual mushroom itself. So what's been pretty fascinating is seeing like what strain does what. And that is one of the things I did at the journey initially was people, even after their facilitator trainings, didn't understand that we.
Oops, sorry, we're not hearing her, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
This is a really important part too. So, Jenna, do you mind kind of repeating what you just said, just because it cut out for the whole period when you got into the really important, juicy part?
Okay. So it was the dosing. No one had really understood or had done in milligrams of natural mushrooms. So what the journey was trying to eliminate pain. With the lab testing, it's been absolutely fascinating to see. So like I started with B+ or B positive because that's a typical, it's similar to the gold, and I just chose to go with that one first. But then we added on another strain later after we got comfortable with how B+ seemed to work. So onset, what kind of journey it seemed to be, that kind of stuff. Then I added Maquila gorilla, which was another, it's a penis envy cross strain. And that one has levels of psilocin in it, which is what psilocybin breaks down to in the body. And what we actually trip on. So what we saw between those two was that the Maquila gorilla, they launched super fast. Like within 5 minutes, people were in the medicine. And they would peak and they would stay there, and then they would come down and be done at like 4 hours, pretty quick. So my theory around that is that psilocin, the body didn't have to convert the psilocybin, so they got hit with that psilocin right away and launched. And then as the body was converting, they just kind of stayed there. B+ was more of like, I'm getting up there, and then I peak, and then there's like some waves, and then I come down. This one was just, I peak and I'm down. And so the other tryptamines too, that's something that I think the labs are, Rose City Labs does a great job. He's really working, Dan, the owner there, is really working hard to have more of a conversation and education about those other tryptamines in there too. There's the norobasosystine and norobasosystine, and I don't know all of them, but there's all these other tryptamines that show that could potentially have effect on the trip, both how it looks like a really fast peak, and then how the come down is, or how the duration of the trip. So that's been really fascinating to see, and to get those lab results is like super nerdy for me. It's been really interesting to see, like, okay, this strain has this, and now over at Fractal we use Shakti strain, and that's been the main one. There's a couple other over there too, but yeah, just psilocybin and psilocin and those other tryptamines. That's been really fast. And at Rose City has done some awesome studies on like lemon teching. We had multiple people in the underground like, well, I always boiled my tea, and I was like, I've heard that like that's how you kill psilocybin, is you get it too hot. You can cook out psilocybin. So what if you're cooking it out, right? If you're boiling the water and it gets too hot. So Dan ran the tests for us and showed that actually boiling water locks it in, and anything like less than that, it starts to degrade it faster. And regular room temperature water actually degrades psilocybin fairly fast.
Yeah.
So
it's just interesting. And this is, you're mentioning Rose City Labs. Is that the one you're referencing in Portland? Okay, very cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting around the around the other pieces. We are actually going to be interviewing Kristen Goad, who at Trichome Labs next week. I'm excited to sort of dive in with somebody about those other pieces to it, and the effects that they can have. Are you guys restricted at all from a legal standpoint on what strains you can work with, or is it just psilocybin dosing, or how do they even dose the psilocin within that calculation?
We don't. So that's another thing that Dan's been an advocate for from Rose City is, and the rest of us at service centers is looking at total potential psilocybin and not just psilocybin, because we're selling it. So one manufacturer that Dan will talk about in his talks is that he brought him and he tested it at like really, really low, almost no psilocybin in the mushroom at all, but had a really high psilocin count. So he wouldn't be able to sell that very well. And it's like, so if you were to sell those mushrooms at the weight of what the milligrams of psilocybin was, that person would have a huge trip because there's a huge amount of psilocin in there, right? But it was so low that this person couldn't even sell it because it wasn't, it was, I can't remember now how little psilocybin was in it, but the psilocin was so high because it looked like it started converting. So that's something that we're pushing for too, because that's a hindrance to the manufacturer. If their product starts, like, let's say they homogenize it all, and then that does start to start the conversion process a little bit. So what if that converts it mostly to psilocin? Well, now their product is not sellable in our system because it doesn't have psilocybin in it, but it has psilocin. So we're working on that too. That's another rule change, is looking at total potential psilocybin instead of just psilocybin. Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the other tryptamines. I had never really been aware that there were other tryptamines present in psilocybin, which could be effective. What were some of the other ones you had mentioned?
Oh, there's baeocystine and norobaeocystine. And there's another one too, that there's like 3, and I can't remember that third one right now off the top of my head.
That's fine. Yeah, it's just so interesting. And and there's a lot of work being done, obviously, like real time in your community. One thing that I learned in the last year is that when it comes to federal rescheduling of drugs, like what's happening with cannabis, that the federal government's looking at data from the states. And so it'd be, as I guess the point is that the data and the work that you're doing to figure this all out is actually going to be impactful in the long run. It's not just, not just like local impact, but national impact, because eventually if this data becomes available, or kind of formalized somewhere or put somewhere that's accessible, it could have an impact on how rescheduling happens, which is great. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think that's really reassuring why these state programs are they're not going to be perfect, right? We've already established that, but they've been very impactful, in the long run, in the short and long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. I'm not sure if there's anything else. We're at 3:00 now, and we usually kind of end at an hour. But if there's anything else you want to share, I know I could probably just kind of keep asking questions. More into like your experience and the finance, and So, but I guess just thank you. Thanks for jumping on and hanging with us for an hour.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I could talk all day about this. It's been absolutely fascinating. I just don't have enough time in the day to like try to do all the things that I would love to do. Now that we have the availability to do so, like you were just saying, like we could have real-time studies going on. I would love to just go to every service center and say, hey, what are you seeing? Let's get some stories. Let's get some data. And we are starting to collect data. That is part of the rules now, that we start collecting data for this, which is good. And I do want people, that would be something I would like people to be aware of. A lot of people are like, I don't want people to know that I'm using a federally illegal substance, and I don't want them to take my data. The way that the data will be done here in Oregon will be through OHSU, which is a Oregon Health and Health Studies University. It's a hospital, but also a university. And they have a really good research team and protocol. And so it's actually protected better than HIPAA. This data will be, because it's protected through RESAM. So that, I know that's a big fear for people, but we're looking at data without any identifying information, just so we can see things like, what did this, like overall, what did this strain do, for example, or how are we able to reduce symptoms in OCD and anxiety and depression and PTSD for folks. Like I would love to be able to share that. So I hope that people can hear the message of, yes, the data collection is scary, but none of us care about the personal part of it, as far as like who you are personally and your name. That will never be attached to it. It is just about the effects of this and how did it help people, so that we can get that message out to start showing in real time, like, look, we're a whole state here doing it and we're helping people every day. Let me show you how this is helping. So that would be another thing that I would love to pursue someday, but I don't have time for everything that I want to pursue. So someday maybe, but I do love that we as a state are collecting that and starting to look at those studies and being able to offer that information here eventually. So that'll be good.
Yeah, I mean, like I have narrow bandwidth myself with a 3-year-old girl. I don't know how you do three boys. I'm sure that further narrows your bandwidth.
Does. They keep me very busy.
That's
Yeah.
I love it. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much interesting work to be done. Honestly, it really is about just having the time to do it. There's a lot. Sarah and I talk frequently, and there's so many things we'd like to do, and it's like we have to keep staying on mission, you know, because otherwise, there's a lot of interesting things, a lot of work that can be done. But that's why it's, you know, we love connecting with you and hearing what you're doing, and you know, just doing what you're doing is super, even just the one, you know, specifically your niche, like you know, on BPD. Did I say the acronym right? You know, I'm sure there's like not many other people, if any, doing what you're doing. So, you know,
not many. No, there was. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, just really impactful is what I said. Yeah.
Oh, good. A note on that, I would like to say, this is part of my beef about it, that just doesn't like cognitively make sense to me. We talk about how psychedelics help regulate the emotion system for folks. And actually borderline personality disorder was close to being renamed and reorganized in the DSM-5, but they didn't do it, which is annoying. But they were going to call it emotion dysregulation disorder. Because that's really the overarching issue with that diagnosis, is that the brain is not able to regulate emotions like it should. So the fact that that's one of the key things that psychedelics can help us do is regulate our emotions, it just seems like a no-brainer that would be the avenue to look at.
Yeah, I think, oops, just get off. Semantics are very important, that's for sure. And you know, Jenna, we just lost you for like the last 5 seconds, 10 seconds.
Okay. I was just talking about how it seems like a no-brainer that borderline personality disorder should be looked at very closely for being this treatment being useful for, because it is all about the brain's ability to regulate emotion. And since psychedelics and study after study after study keeps showing that it helps tremendously with emotion regulation in the brain, seems like that should be not something that's getting screened out of the studies, but the exact opposite.
Yeah, they should be screened in.
Yeah.
That's your own study.
I mean, it just demonstrates how important that messaging is, and the use of the right words. You know, the semantics are hugely important. If you could just change a couple variables and maybe take it out of its normal context, because borderline personality disorder doesn't sound great. It sounds like very hard to deal with. But if you do a new messaging on it, all of a sudden a slight pivot makes it completely make sense why that should be one of the top diagnoses to be addressed with psychedelics. Right? It's very. I love what's great about that is how easily you can make an argument just with a slight change of perception or perspective.
Yeah. You know? This is the lawyer.
Yeah, I do enjoy a good argument. Yeah, the argument being used, and not. I don't like to argue with people at all. I like to discourse, you know, about it. You know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jenna. This has been so much fun, and we hope to have you on again, especially as New Jersey starts to open up and as you continue to work in your practice, like what else we can sort of glean from all of the wisdom you've gathered over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I would love to come back anytime. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And we will we'll have this posted on our YouTube channel. We'll also have this posted on our website. And I'll make sure to include in the YouTube channel all the links for people to be able to find you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See you later.